On Sunday, the 16th of August, 1818, a young Englishman stepped off of a boat onto the docks near London Bridge after a long 9-day voyage from Scotland. Upon disembarking, he traveled onwards to pay a visit to his friends who lived in the city. Yet the news that greeted him across the threshold of his friend's home would upend his life entirely. The man's brother was extremely ill, and the doctor had wrote to him, begging for him to be sent for immediately. The one who received this grave warning on that fateful summer Sunday in London was none other than John Keats, one of the most celebrated poets of the 19th century. With the doctor's words ringing in his ears, Keats rushed home, but what he saw upon arrival truly shocked him. Seeing his brother Tom's emaciated face as he lay in his bed, Keats knew that there would be no hope of recovery. The final stages of tuberculosis had set in. It was against this grim backdrop, therefore, that the 22-year-old Keats would take on the role as Tom's carer at the twilight of his life. He would nurse his brother day and night to help ease his suffering and bring him what small relief could be granted. In his own words, Keats was acutely aware that his brother looks upon me as his only comfort. However, comfort for the poet himself would be in scarce supply in the weeks and months to follow. Despite the burdens that he carried, Keats still dreamed of his life's greatest passion, poetry. The desire for literary greatness still smoldered in his heart, as his mind teemed with ideas. Poetry would also provide a temporary escape from the troubles that weighed upon him in the fleeting moments between daily duties. As summer gave way to autumn, Keats would set out to write a story, but not just any story, one told in the form of an epic poem. The poem would be called Hyperion. Inspired by Greek mythology, Hyperion would follow the fall of the Titans and the rise of the new Olympian gods. In the myths of ancient Greece, this fall was the culmination of a 10-year war between the Titans, led by Saturn, and the Olympians, led by the god Zeus. The story of the Titans is central to Greek mythology and represents the shift from the older generation of gods to the new rulers, the Olympians. But by Keats's time, Western literature was not unfamiliar to epic poetry. Homer's Odyssey, Milton's Paradise Lost, and Dante's Divine Comedy were all immortalized works that Keats was aware of, and which, in many ways, shadowed his thoughts. Faced with their achievements, how could a man in his early 20s dare to come close to such greatness? Nevertheless, on the morning of the 21st of September 1818, Keats sat down to begin the first of Hyperion's opening passages. The first 14 lines are as follows. Deep in the shady sadness of a vale, far sunken from the healthy breath of morn, far from the fiery noon, and eve's one star, sat gray-haired Saturn, quiet as a stone, still as the silence round about his lair. Forest on forest hung about his head, like cloud on cloud. No stir of air was there. Not so much life as on a summer's day robs not one light seed from the feathered grass, but where the dead leaf fell, there did it rest. A stream went voiceless by, still deadened more by reason of his fallen divinity spreading a shade. The naiad, mid her reeds, pressed her cold finger closer to her lips. It is in these opening lines that we encounter Saturn, still as the silence round about his lair, depicting the state and surroundings of the former ruler of the deposed Titans, presumably at the end of the Titan era. In opening his story, Keats places the reader not into the midst of the epic struggle between the old gods and the new, but in its aftermath, its wake, in the quiet vacuum of empty space that follows a great struggle, perhaps the greatest in all of Greek mythology. In the words of Samuel Beckett, nothing is more real than nothing. And Keats, understanding this, balances this important nothingness of what's missing against the depiction of Saturn and his surroundings. Reading on, the poem continues. Along the margin sand, large footmarks went, no further than to where his feet had strayed, and slept there since. Upon the sodden ground, his old right hand lay nerveless, listless, dead, unsceptered. And his realmless eyes were closed, while his bowed head seemed listening to the earth, his ancient mother, for some comfort yet. A second character, Thea, now enters, depicted as a nurturing, compassionate figure as seen in the following lines. It seemed no force could wake him from his place, but there came one, who with a kindred hand touched his wide shoulders, after bending low with reverence, though to one who knew it not. She was a goddess of the infant world. By her in stature the tall Amazon had stood a pygmy's height. She would have ta'en Achilles by the hair and bent his neck, or with a finger stayed Ixion's wheel. Her face was large as that of Memphian Sphinx, pedestaled haply in a palace court, when sages looked to Egypt for their lore. But oh, how unlike marble was that face! How beautiful! If sorrow had not made sorrow more beautiful than beauty's self. There was a listening fear in her regard, as if calamity had but begun, as if the vanward clouds of evil days had spent their malice, and the sullen rear was with its stored thunder laboring up. One hand she pressed upon that aching spot where beats the human heart, as if just there, though an immortal, she felt cruel pain. The other upon Saturn's bended neck she laid, and to the level of his ear leaning with parted lips, some words she spake in solemn tenor and deep organ tone, some mourning words, which in our feeble tongue would come in these like accents. Oh, how frail to that large utterance of the early gods. Saturn, look up. Though wherefore, poor old king, I have no comfort for thee, no not one. I cannot say, oh, wherefore sleepest thou? For heaven is parted from thee, and the earth knows thee not, thus afflicted, for a god. And ocean too, with all its solemn noise, has from thy scepter passed, and all the air is emptied of thine hoary majesty. Thy thunder, conscious of the new command, rumbles reluctant o'er our fallen house, and thy sharp lightning in unpracticed hands scorches and burns our once serene domain. O aching time, O moments big as years, all as ye pass swell out the monstrous truth, and press it so upon our weary griefs that unbelief has not a space to breathe. Saturn, sleep on, O thoughtless. Why did I thus violate thy slumberous solitude? Why should I ope thy melancholy eyes? Saturn, sleep on, while at thy feet I weep. In this passage, Thea, a Titaness, begins to speak in a monologue that Keats uses to capture the enormity of what Saturn has lost, spelling out the brutal truths that now face the deposed ruler. At the end of her speech, Thea laments her decision to rouse Saturn from his slumber, violating his peaceful solitude, recognizing that perhaps it would have been kinder to let him remain in ignorant slumber. This conflict between knowledge and blissful ignorance resonates with one of the main themes of Keats's work, and indeed of the Romantic era, the struggle between the desire to know and the pain that knowledge often brings. Yet this entire monologue embodies a deeper idea of Keats, a concept Keats first described in a letter to his brothers in 1817, 1 year before he began writing Hyperion. He coined this concept, negative capability. Keats described negative capability as what leads a person to being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. It's the ability to perceive and accept the world and human experience without the need to reconcile conflicting points of view or observations. Put more concretely, it's about a person, an artist, capturing the fullness and richness of life, with all its uncertainties and paradoxes. It's about living the questions, rather than trying to live the answers. In Thea's portion of the poem, we explore loss, confusion, and despair, without a clear resolution in sight. This refusal to resolve the complexities of the human experience and the ability to dwell in doubt and uncertainty exemplify the concept of negative capability. This approach Keats takes makes it richer, more thought-provoking, and more open to our own interpretation, ultimately crafting a story that invites us as readers to engage more deeply, not only with the poem, but with the complexities of life itself. John Keats's brother Tom died on the 1st of December 1818, with the poet caring for him until the very end. Yet while the poem Hyperion continues on for longer than these first 3 passages, we cannot help but see the story in the context of Keats during this dark period of his life. As Oscar Wilde once remarked, "Every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not of the sitter. The sitter is merely the accident, the occasion. It is not he who is revealed by the painter. It is rather the painter who, on the colored canvas, reveals himself." Perhaps Keats's own troubled feelings influenced the words he wrote during the final months of his brother's illness. Yet rather than rejecting the hardships of life, Keats, in a letter written in April the following year, describes how a person's character is forged through the suffering and fevers of life. Keats's philosophy of the world as a veil of soul-making suggests that a person's identity is not born fully formed, but is made and developed through experiences. In his letter, Keats rejects simple consolations for life's hardships. Instead, he sees these hardships as essential to the development of a complex, richly textured individual. In this letter, he writes, "I began by seeing how man was formed by circumstances. And what are circumstances but touchstones of his heart? And what are touchstones but provings of his heart, but fortifiers or alterers of his nature? And what is his altered nature but his soul? And what was his soul before it came into the world, and had these provings and alterations and perfectionings? An intelligence without identity. And how is this identity to be made? Through the medium of the heart? And how is the heart to become this medium but in a world of circumstances?" As Keats walked with his brother's coffin over the threshold of St. Stephen's Church on the 7th of December, perhaps these thoughts were already percolating through his mind. Surrounded by the tombs of his father and mother, Keats, at some level, may have reflected on the struggles he had endured and how they shaped him as an artist. For in his brief life, Keats would transmute his hardships into some of the most beautiful works of English literature. The trials that he faced would not only shape Keats the individual, but the stories he wrote. And perhaps, those are the tales most worth telling.